Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. David Benatar will be giving a talk about the problem of wild animal suffering at the Center for Ethics at the University of Toronto. The talk will be on September 25th, 12 p.m., I guess Canadian time. The topic is around animal rights. If animals have rights, then we have a duty to save wild animals from predators and other evils. But we have no such duty to save wild animals from predators and other evils, and therefore animals do not have rights. That is the argument against which David Benatar is going to present. Now, the event is in person. As always, we want the audio recording. So please email to ethics@utoronto.ca requesting them for an audio recording, or alternatively, reply to this tweet. I'll put the link in the description. On September 20th, there was a talk by Dr. Hayry in the Ethics of Human Extinction reading group, which MLP Torres organizes. It was about Mati's current views on the matter, building on the ideas outlined in the publications like Confessions of an Antinatalist Philosopher, Exit Duty Generator, and A Rational Cure for Pre-Reproductive Stress Syndrome. Usually, they put up a recording of these talks on their channel. The video is not out yet, at least at the time of recording of this video, so we'll wait for it. We have a video of a famous programmer, David Hanson, who is a Danish millennial computer programmer. On a programming channel, he had a wild rant about having children and why people should have them. Let's start with a question the host asks him.
So one of the things that you had said about sort of recognizing that your past self didn't understand something and then understanding it much better later, that I really sort of like resonated with on a not technical but personal level is from your article about Children of You, and just maybe you can sort of summarize what your position is about the feeling of having kids and the sort of life change experience it is. It's something that Prime and I have talked a lot about. So I just think it would be kind of fun to have sort of a non-technical side discussion about that aspect.
Okay, so right off the bat, we get a hint in the question. It is about the experience of the parent. Let's see what he says.
I think it's a great question and one with great weight, literally for the future of the world. But I also do think it has interesting, funny, sometimes hilarious parallels to technology. And I'll start with it in the sense that a lot of technology that's very popular, a lot what you will hear is all the reason people don't like it. Like if you go on some board and you look up some car model, like actually yesterday I was looking at an Alfa Romeo Giulia. And I was like, oh, I hear there's something about reliability issues, maybe. So I go on the boards, I search for it. And you know what I find? I find a bunch of reliability issues. Because you know who fucking writes on the internet? People with problems. So that's what you see. You see people with problems outnumber the people who just go on with their merry life, not just go on with their life, but loving it, right? Loving their Giulia in this example. Outnumber 10 to 1, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1. I think that's a little bit what's been happening with parenthood. We have actually been inundated for I don't know how long with all the ways it's shitty to be a parent. It's fucking expensive, and like, how could you even do it to the climate, and like all these other decel bullshit, crazy ideas of how we could turn ourselves into extinction, right?
So his point is there's a minority of people making majority of noise about difficulties in parenthood. Secondly, the claim that parenthood is expensive is not true. Thirdly, climate change being a reason for someone to not have kids is crazy. And fourthly, he swiftly jumps to extinction. Here he contradicts himself. If there is a minority of people making noise about difficulties of parenthood, how will them not having children lead to extinction? But I guess an appeal to extinction is a good tool of fear-mongering for pro-natalists.
Like all that, like that's been the prime thing, because do you know what? That's no, the people who just go like, do you know what? The laughter of my 4-year-old is literally the most amazing sound that exists in this world. Most of those people don't go to Twitter to write that.
Most amazing sound that exists in the world? For whom? For you. So you are at the center of concern here, and not the child that you're creating. You have no problem using that child as a means to produce that most amazing sound. This in and of itself is deeply problematic. Have you thought about the cost that the child is going to pay for this? You have created a whole new person who will have to go on living for 80 to 90 years, and that is if they are lucky.
Like it sounds banal. And it sounds banal because it's so universally true that it feels like I don't need to say that, right? Yeah, right up until the 1,000 to 1 ratio has poisoned everyone's head into thinking that having kids is just insurmountable challenge.
It is an insurmountable challenge, not necessarily for the parent, but for the child itself. Once that child is here, there is no way that child can revert the harm that is done to them. Because, in the words of David Benatar, life is bad, but so is death. And life is bad partly because death is inevitable and bad.
And I'm like, do you know how you fucking got onto this earth? There's literally like 5 million years of people who have it far worse than you, who have to fight fucking literal saber-tooths. If they didn't fight a saber-tooth back then, you weren't here, right? Like that's your great whatever triple 50 times ancestor. So you're like fretting over the fact that like, I don't get as much free time to drink mimosas then. Like what? What? Like I wanna play some more Call of Duty. Like on my free time.
Now, this is nonsense argument. My ancestors lived through hard times, so I should have a guilt about it, and therefore my concerns are petty. My ancestors lived through times when slavery was normal, racism was normal. Many of my ancestors literally did child marriage. Many were rapists, many indulged into incest. There is a good chance that somewhere down my ancestry, all these things happened more than once. I could argue that I am a result of rape, incest, and child marriage. So what? These things don't tell us to continue these practices. Why should we take what our ancestors did as a benchmark to what I should be doing now? Let me say this. You are a programmer. If you were told to go and work in a mine for 1 day per week without proper safety tools, and if you complain that it's too risky, can I then say that, hey, some of your ancestors worked in even harsher conditions than those, and here you are complaining about working 1 day while enjoying your keyboard job for the rest of your week? That is how stupid your argument sounds.
I think we need to correct that ratio somewhat by some testimony of just how goddamn amazing it is to literally create life.
Again, amazing for whom? For you. Why are you so narcissistic?
Of just how goddamn amazing it is to literally create life. From like stuff floating around like right below your boxers. Like that turns into this amazing kid.
Dogs do that. A rat living in a sewer can do that. What's so special about you? You had unprotected sex. What did you expect to produce through it? A plasma TV?
Kid who I would literally at any second with no hesitation sacrifice myself.
Yeah, well, that is firstly doubtful. We have thousands of cases of parents later on in their life expecting children to pay back for their sacrifices. So these are not sacrifices to start with. But even if you were to sacrifice, it is still not a sacrifice. If I intentionally put somebody into the line of fire and then I go on to save them while getting burnt myself, is that really a sacrifice? You literally bring a child here and then to save them you sacrifice yourself. This is not a sacrifice. It is pretension of a sacrifice.
Like, I don't have that level of devotion to any of my ideas, any of my creative pursuits, any of anything. I'd be like, you can't do Ruby on Rails tomorrow. I'd be like, oh man, that's a real bummer. Okay, I'll figure something else out. Like,
that just tells that nothing other than yourself actually concerns you deeply.
Figure something else out. Like, you start questioning like the future of my children, and I'm like, yeah, I will nuke 1 billion people. Like, okay, where's the button? Like, if that's the trade-off here, that's what I'm going to do. Now, that sounds insane. And that is actually the appeal of parenthood.
That's the appeal of parenthood? You'll nuke 1 billion people for sake of your children? Just proves my point of your narcissism again. Just think about it. The question is, should you create someone who you would love so much that horrible suffering of 1 billion people would not matter you?
It is an embraced, shared form of insanity. And insanity from the perspective of like, I don't have kids. Because it sounds so far out and it's so hard to relate the elation, the life satisfaction that comes from having children.
Again, we still see no concern for the child who'd be created. All I could hear was me, my satisfaction, how this is amazing for me. I don't care for the suffering of billions that exist, and I'm not thinking of the suffering of the child that will be created. It's about me.
That it's almost like the other thing we talked about, like it's actually difficult to use words because words can describe like the things you know. Oh, less free time for my mimosas and Call of Duty. Oh, I know that. I know mimosa. I know Call of Duty. Like I can hold a controller. Trade it up against like literal life, literal fucking life you created. You haven't created any other life. It's not like, oh yeah, I was just doing some biohacking in my basement and came up with this mutant that was really cute. Like that's not a sort of experience you've otherwise had, right? So you literally don't have a context to relate the words to.
Well, there are also types of suffering for which you don't have words to relate to. No amount of words can give you an idea of what it means to have cancer until you have cancer. You don't have words to relate to what it means to be in the middle of a nuclear explosion. In fact, almost all experiences we go through cannot be properly described. Words cannot do justice to qualia. But this does not justify anything, let alone the act of creating another qualia.
So when I say like I would sacrifice myself in a heartbeat for any of my children for almost any reason, like that doesn't hit, right? Like it doesn't go in there because there's no slot for that information to penetrate.
So the point is, those who don't have kids can't understand why someone could sacrifice for their children. This is an idiotic statement. It is not that we don't know about this. It is that it is actually not a real sacrifice to start with. In many species of octopus, for example, children eat their own mother to death. The mother here sacrifices herself for children's nutrition. Many bird parents put their lives in danger to distract a fox who is coming to eat their eggs. Nature is full of examples of these apparent acts of altruism. That's because selfish genes program you to do these acts so that there is a greater chance of survival of their own copies. We'll come to that later.
Do you know what's interesting is I've had another topic where I've faced this, and this is about wealth. So I became a millionaire like pretty early in my life. I think 26, no, what was that? 27, something like that. And I had this conception that life was just going to be just a puffy cloud after that, right? Like, what the fuck you mean? I don't have to worry about any money of any kind. Oh man, I'm just floating on the cloud. Every day is amazing. Every minute is a feast. Everything is no, it wasn't, right? And then you realize it's better. Like, I'd rather be rich than I'd not be rich. But it's also not like the thing you think it is. But I can't use the words I have from that experience to tell you that. Because first of all, you can tell me I'm full of shit. It's just because you got yours and all these other things. And you can't actually conceptualize what life is like after that. It's a little bit the same thing. Now, the good thing is having children is far more accessible than becoming a millionaire.
It's not a good thing at all. Hank Green made video about how bizarre it is that you can just make a whole new person. And Lawrence Anton doubled down on that in this video. UN had a report saying over more than half of all pregnancies are unintended. And that is a global crisis. So no, the fact that it is so easily accessible is not necessarily a good thing. I'm not saying that we should artificially restrict people's reproductive rights, but at the same time, the fact that you can so easily create a whole new person without any consideration at all, just as a result of having sex, is very, very worrisome.
A millionaire. So it literally just requires you to find someone that hopefully you love, but at least that you can tolerate for like hopefully the rest of your life, or at least until those kids are older. Like that's, I mean, the whole human race did that. Like that's why you're here. That's why we're here.
The whole human race did that and that's why we are here? No, that's not why we are here. That's how we are here. Don't confuse between how and why. The history of ancestors only tells how we have come here. It does not provide any justification of why we have to be here. Besides, the whole human race did other stupid things also.
Here, like the lineage, 100% hit ratio. 100% hit ratio all the way back to the dawn of man. For you to be here, people did that, right?
No, people had sex and you were the unfortunate result of a series of accidents. There was no purpose. It was a series of accidents. You can assign purpose going back to a few generations from now, maybe up until modern humans, but before that, it was just wild sex. Have as many babies as you can. Whoever survives to pass on their genes without any rhyme or reason for doing that.
Don't tell me it's that hard. This is one of the techniques I often use to make myself learn something or realize something. Like I'll, I don't know, try to learn how to surf. Like surfing is actually kind of hard, like the first time. And it takes a lot of, you get one shot right on the board, you fucking fall off, and now you got to swim all the way out to the wave, and you got to wave until the right wave. And I would often go like, this is too hard. And then I'd go like, in human history, how many people learned how to surf? It's got to be hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Am I that stupid? Am I that uncoordinated that literally a million people could figure it out? and I couldn't figure it out?
What kind of argument is this? There are 8 billion humans today. In the history, there have been 106 billion humans. There would be millions of people who could do some things that I could not. Why should that be a cause of guilt anyway? And on top of it, to use this to say that it is not hard to have children, I think he's talking here about raising children rather than having them. And that is hard. His argument does not consider that throughout human history, very few humans would have raised their children carefully. To raise children in the social structure that we are in today is not easy. It is easy for a millionaire to say that it is not hard, but that is not a ground reality. And anyway, that is besides the point about having children.
And then I think about that with parenthood too. Like how many people, like what is it, 150 billion people have lived, or 100 billion people, or whatever it is. All of them figured out how to be a parent.
He is confusing between becoming a parent and being a good parent. Becoming a parent is easy if you have functioning genitals and reproductive organs and a partner to work with. That's all you need to become a parent. But being a good parent is not easy. Those 106 billion humans in history, if you look at the things that they would have done, you would not say that they were good parents. And you don't have to go that far back. Most of the times, parents complain about their own parents, about how wrongly they were brought up.
To varying degrees of success or capacity, whatever, but they did it, right? Like that's why we're here. So 100 billion people, can I figure it out too? Yeah, I could probably figure it out. And then not just figuring it out, right? That's a mission statement. That's like, I need to solve a task. But once you have kids, like, again, it's so trite, and that's what's so amazing. Like you want to say things like, it completes me. And like you'll actually like mean the words, which sounds so fucking stupid, I think.
No, it is not that it sounds stupid. It is stupid. Children complete you is just another way of saying that children give meaning to your life. That's the Ponzi scheme. We need new recruits to get meaning, who in turn will need to have children of their own to get meaning in their own lives, and so on. This is quite clearly a Ponzi scheme.
I think I would have thought that before I had kids. But I just go like, of all the things we could try in life, there's a lot of things you should try. You should try at some point to pull 3 Gs. You know, it's really fun when like you barely can hold up your head, and you can try that in a race car. You can try that in a merry-go-round. You should try to, if we're talking to programmers here, you should try to like release a piece of open source, or at least submit a ticket to something. That's a life experience. You just go like, your life will be richer afterwards. So take those little things, right? Like try 3 Gs, do a pull request, create life.
So in the programming world, let's say there is an existing software and you want to enhance that by writing some extra new programs in it. What you do is submit what is called as a pull request. This essentially means that you're contributing to development of a program. And this guy compares that activity to creating a new life.
Like, where do you think it fucking ranks? Where do you think it ranks? It ranks, for most people actually through all of human history, number one. I mean, you have literal fucking conquerors who somehow enslave half the world, and they'd go like, yeah, I will die for my children. Like, that's what it is. And it's accessible, like all the way down here. 100 million or 100 billion people did it. Like, you should do it too. So, a huge endorsement of the idea that children are good and you should have them, even if it's for selfish reasons, which is what's so amazing. That even if you're like, I want to create a child because I want to create life in my image, it sounds like you're fucking God, right?
It sounds like you are a narcissist with no empathy for creating suffering being.
Fucking God, right? So you do that, and then you realize in the act of doing that, almost anyone who goes through that process will become the most selfless person ever that they've ever known in relationship to that new human. We just talked about the potty training, right? Mm-hmm. There is literally no amount of money you could pay me to pick up your shit. Like, you'd go like, do you know what? Here's $1 billion. You just have to like assemble my excrements with your hands. I'd go like, keep the billion. Now, fair enough. Other people will make a different choice there, but I'm not going to do that. Do you know what? For my kid, I'd say yuck, and I'm going to do it. I'm just selflessness. It sort of injects into your goddamn being is next level.
Becoming selfless in relation to your child is just being selfish. In Selfish Gene, Dawkins says animal behavior, altruistic or selfish, is under the control of genes in only an indirect but still very powerful sense. A gene might be able to assist replicas of itself that are sitting in other bodies. If so, this would appear as individual altruism, but it would be brought about by gene selfishness. It is easy to show that close relatives, kin, have a greater than average chance of sharing genes. It has long been clear that this must be why altruism by parents towards their young is so common. So this sacrifice that you're talking about is not a sacrifice to start with, so your argument doesn't even start.
X into your goddamn being is next level. And I know some people have found that through LSD or whatever. Okay, great, I guess. But also, like, just make a fucking another human. Like, we need them.
Oops, all the talk of selflessness and sacrifice evaporated. Now it is we need them, that's why create humans. Use them as a means to fulfill your own desires and call that a selfless act.
Need them. Like, if you all stop, there's literally not going to be anyone left. Like, that's a truism there. And like, it's going to suck. It's going to suck. We should make more children, and all the ideas, the D-cell bullshit about like whether you even have the right to do it because climate, blah, blah. Take that shit out the back.
So all this rant was just on the theme of me, myself, my amazing experience, my selflessness and my virtues. This person has no concern for the fact that they are creating a being who will go through suffering in order to enjoy the pleasures that it was not deprived of in the first place. All of that without that being's consent and gambling with their life because it was amazing for this parent. Now, I have been a computer programmer myself, and I know personally that programming requires you to think logically on so many different levels. So it is even more disappointing to see these programmers leaving their logical thinking at the desk when it comes to ethical problems. Club Random Podcasts is a podcast hosted by Bill Maher and has over 600,000 subscribers. Jordan Peterson was invited there, and the topic of antinatalism was brought up. Here's what he had to say.
If you are tortured, even unjustly, and you lose faith in yourself and the structure of existence, it isn't only that you become demoralized, it's that you tilt towards malevolence. You start to work against things. And this is why, for example, I'm not thrilled in the least with the antinatalist types. You know, they make this claim that existence is characterized by suffering that's so intense that it would be better if consciousness itself just ceased to exist. And you can make that's Mephistopheles' case, by the way.
It's Silenus in Greek mythology.
Well, you can make a case for it.
What would be better to have never been born?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
I think we need a qualification here. Antinatalists don't claim that existing conscious beings should cease to exist. They are against bringing new conscious beings into existence. You might argue that on a universal level, that would still result in consciousness ceasing to exist, which is true, and that can also be a goal of some antinatalists. But no antinatalist is purely utilitarian in that approach. That's why many antinatalists, including David Benatar, have denied pushing the hypothetical red button. And even the staunchest of the red button pushers are aware of other aspects like autonomy, harms of death, right to life, suffering through the process of extinction, and so keep the experiment purely in the realms of hypothesis.
and you might say, okay, fair enough. What you're doing essentially is saying that the suffering in existence invalidates its utility. But what if it is the case that if you believe that you become an agent that produces suffering? Well, that is what seems to happen, is that
Right.
like once you turn against life, I mean, look, everyone's going to have a time in their life when they think, oh my God, like really? Is this worth it? Like you watch someone you love suffer, or maybe you're in agony for doing something good, let's say in the worst possible situation. You think, really? Like really? And so then maybe you get cynical and you get bitter. But the problem is that has a direction too. That is what happens to Cain. Like he starts out cynical and bitter, but he ends up murderous, and his descendants are genocidal. Like that doesn't seem like a good alternative.
Suffering is existence, or to exist is to suffer, is pessimism in general. Not that it's an invalid position, but that is not antinatalism. Antinatalism is concerned about 1, coming into existence, and 2, continuing of coming into existence over many generations. And so even those who are ready to push the red button, their aim is not to seize existing life, but to seize the process of creation of new lives, albeit through the means of seizing existing life in this case. I'm not defending any position on red button here, but I just want to clarify that Peterson's understanding of antinatalism is misplaced to look like antinatalism is the same as pessimism, which it is not. So Peterson is making the claim that someone who is personally demoralized because of the realization of suffering in the world, that they go out to kill everyone else. One, if they do that, they would be motivated by pessimism and not by antinatalism. Two, even then, the argument for pessimism is not refuted. What you do with an argument is different than what the argument actually is. We have had people, for example, going to wars on the idea of non-violence and peace. Today is a famous mainstream American television show running since 1952. Their YouTube channel has over 4.5 million subscribers, and on their website there was an article on antinatalism. What is antinatalism? Meet the folks who say no one should have kids ever. Some of them are parents. Yes, one can be an antinatalist and have children either through adoption or if they've had them in the past before coming to know about antinatalism. The article included 4 antinatalists. 2 of them were parents. They had biological children in their past, and the other 2 must be familiar names to you if you've been watching this channel: Lawrence Anton and Amanda Suknik. Of the parents was Anna Ciani, I hope I'm saying her name right, who is from Guatemala. She is a mother of 2 children and a wife to a loving husband. But talking about her children, she says, I do regret the fact that I impose life on them. I regret forcing them into this life in which I can't guarantee anything except that I will love them forever and do my best to keep them safe. In hindsight, she says, I would never bring my children into this world. Another parent was Mark, whose photo and his last name was hidden. Mark is a single dad to 10-year-old daughter in Austria, and he loves his daughter, but after reading David Benatar's Better Never to Have Been, he recognized that he should not have brought her here. In his own words, I wouldn't give her up for anything. I don't regret having my daughter for my sake, but I do regret it for her sake. She doesn't have a bad life, but that doesn't mean there was justification to create her. This reminds me of a conversation David Benatar had with Elizabeth Harman many years ago. Elizabeth is a philosopher at Princeton University, and when she was pregnant, she went and told the news to David Benatar and said that Benatar just have to be happy for her. Benatar replied, I am happy for you. It is your expected child for whom I am not happy. Anyway, coming back to Mark, we are talking real father-daughter relationship here, and it was not easy for Mark to accept antinatalism. The article goes into details of his story. He's not comfortable talking about antinatalism with his daughter, and although I can't say I could relate to what he must be going through, I can certainly understand the complexity involved in the situation. The article also talks about anxieties antinatalist parents have about being grandparents. Then we had Lawrence Anton, whose main point was consent argument. Any harm imposed on people is inherently without their consent. He says, in all other areas of life, we view consent as very important. Sex without consent is sexual coercion. Work without consent is slavery. But for some reason, when it comes to procreation and imposing all of the harm that one will experience in life and death, people waive consent as if it doesn't matter. What antinatalists say is, it is important. The fact that it's impossible to get consent from the unborn doesn't mean that we can ignore it. And then we have Amanda, seen here imagining an unplug button for the universe. She points out that many people wrongly get offended when talking about antinatalism. But she says we are talking about ethics of procreation, not your child or you as a parent. Amanda also clarifies that the main reason for antinatalism, or at least her antinatalism, is different than general environmentalism. It has to do with suffering of all sentient beings. Amanda's Exploring Antinatalism podcast and a new book with Hayry, Antinatalism, Extinction and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption, were also mentioned in the article, and so was Lawrence's Antinatalism Around the World podcast. This is such a great news to see our fellow antinatalists and antinatalism in proper mainstream media. Voluntas is an international journal of philosophy which recently had an article about Benatarian antinatalism and Schopenhauer's metaphysical pessimism. The article was in Portuguese language, so my understanding of this could be impacted by translation errors. Andrew Mario Gonçalves Oliveira, who is the author of this article, compared Benatarian antinatalism to Schopenhauer's pessimism. He used 6 aspects to do this comparison. On Benatarian side, we have deprivation as suffering. This is the basis of Benatar's 4th premise of his axiological asymmetry, that absence of pleasure is not bad unless there is someone who is deprived of it. Schopenhauer also recognizes deprivation, or the state of lacking, as a fundamental state of the will. Lack of reflection This is the aspect about how lightly people take decision of having children, if at all they consider it as a decision to start with. Benatar says creating new people by having babies is so much a part of human life that it is rarely thought even to require a justification. Indeed, most people do not even think about whether they should or should not make a baby. They just make one. And we all know the famous Schopenhauer's quote, "If children were brought into the world by an act of pure reason alone, would the human race continue to exist?" According to Schopenhauer, we are all bound by a blind and irrational will. If procreation was left just to our reason, then we would not have had children. Then there is asymmetry. Benatar's axiological asymmetry is the asymmetry between non-existence and existence from the perspective of the one who can potentially be brought into existence. Andrew sums it nicely in a sentence. Infinite non-existence could never contain enough evils to justify being removed from it. There are also some other asymmetries which Benatar refers to, like empirical asymmetry between the good and bad things. Now, this is also the case with Schopenhauer. Suffering, evil, is positive, which is a default state, and pleasure or satisfaction are mere suspension from that state for some time. Fourth aspect is glad to be born attitude. We employ many psychological mechanisms to cope with the suffering of existence. We try to adapt to the situation around us. We try to compare ourselves with those who are less fortunate than us, just so that we can feel good about ourselves. And we have optimism bias and Pollyanna principle. We tend to remember good things from the past and project them onto our future. As a result, we feel glad to be born. But Benatar already notes in Better Never to Have Been that "I am glad to be born" is a different statement than "it is better that I came into existence." I can very well feel glad that I am born because of all these psychological mechanisms, but I can't say it is better that I came into existence as I was harmed because of it. This is an interesting comparison. Schopenhauer's will is manifested in our deprivation. In a way, we are slaves to the whims of will. The will generates desires and makes us do things. And through that process, it makes us suffer, even if we might not perceive that as suffering. This is similar to optimism bias and Pollyanna principle of Benatar, that we may be glad to be born, but in reality, we go through suffering which could never be better for us. Rather, it would have been better had we not been born. Benatar also considers animal suffering and different shades of non-human animal suffering. Benatar, after all, is a sentiocentric antinatalist. Schopenhauer has similar gradation of suffering. He recognizes that humans suffer more than animals due to their enhanced cognitive capacity. But non-human animals suffer too. It's not like they don't suffer at all. Lack of meaning, or at least the lack of cosmic meaning, is a point made vividly in Benatar's The Human Predicament. We can only get terrestrial meaning, which is bound by practical boundaries, beyond which our quest for meaning starts getting circular. Schopenhauer recognizes the desire for meaning as one of the many desires which could be fulfilled, if at all, only temporarily. Now, one could argue that in Schopenhauer's framework, obeying the will could be said to be the meaning of life, but the will itself is irrational and has no external purpose. Andrew compares these 6 aspects to demonstrate that Benatarian antinatalism aligns with Schopenhauerian pessimism. Now, I'm not an expert on Schopenhauer by any stretch, but Schopenhauer was just before the period of Charles Darwin. Maybe he was around the same time as Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. But the point is, he was way before the period when natural selection and genetics were discovered. The behavior and evolution of genes provide us a good description of how and why humans and other animals have been programmed to behave the way they do. The quote from Selfish Gene, "We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecule known as genes." I'm not saying that Schopenhauer's metaphysical will can be replaced by physical genes. There are many levels of explanation which are required even beyond genes, right from the molecular level to subatomic particles to space-time structure and so on. But genes, I view, provides us with good description of procreation and its futility, which can help as a foundation for Benatarian antinatalism. Anastasia Berg is a co-author of the book What Are Children For? On ambivalence and choice. She appeared on this New York Times podcast, Why Have Kids? A liberal case for natalism. Her point is, nowadays, at least in America, having children is seen as a conservative action, and liberals and progressives are lacking a similar drive to have children. And so she wants to convince liberals and progressives to have children. And so she raises a philosophical question.
And that before we try and reconcile having children with this or that political goal, we have to be able to answer a deep ethical philosophical question. And in fact, one that we human beings have been asking ever since we started asking philosophical questions at all. And that's the question of the worth of human life.
Now here she is not asking worth of a human life, but rather worth of human life in general. She is implicitly pointing to the value that we assign to our own species. Now she's taking a lot of jumps here. The worth of anything is the value of that thing for a valuer. So worth of human species is the value of species Homo sapiens to Homo sapiens. Another implicit assumption is if nobody has children, the human species will go extinct and we would have lost something worthwhile. But if we are the valuer who are assigning this value to our own species, then extinction of our own species is a loss exactly to whom? To the universe, which is indifferent to our existence anyway. Another point is she jumps from individual to species very quickly. The decision to have children is an individual one. It is unlikely that we are going extinct by voluntarily declining birth rates. So appealing to extinction for individuals to have children is not very convincing. And even though human extinction in this way is unlikely, if an individual decides not to have children, then that potential child and all its descendants are saved from coming into existence. On the other hand, this new being that we are going to create, who before being born can't be bothered about your worldly problems, Anastasia thinks of that being as just a means to prove the worth of species. On abc.net, there was a podcast about parents who regret having children. They interviewed Dr. Imogen Smith, who works in the field of postnatal and antenatal psychology. The discussion was about the shame that parents feel about expressing their feeling of regret for having children. Now, even though this was more about parents than about the children that they had, there was an important aspect from antinatalist point of view. Regret can work both ways. You might regret having children after you've had them, or you might regret not having them in the past when the time was right. But in the case where you regret not having children, it is only you who is involved. In the case when you regret having children, it is you and a whole new being whose existence is at stake. Unsolicited Advice is a significant channel with more than 340,000 subscribers, and they have put out a video, Having Children is Wrong, Antinatalism. The video is all about David Benatar and Better Never to Have Been. It talks about antinatalism in general, Benatar's asymmetry argument, the quality of life argument, consequences of accepting antinatalism, and also some avenues of objections like the clash of intuitions and moral relativism, etc. This is definitely a video worth watching.